BPI Sports has always been a massive supporter of natural bodybuilding, so it only made sense for us and them to partner up. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by BPI Sports, and if you want to support them and us, use code Natty News Daily at checkout for some exclusive discounts off any of your orders. Enjoy the episode. What's happening, people? Welcome to another episode of Natty News Daily. We've got Mr. Josh Bradshaw on with us tonight. As you can see, Dan didn't get the message to always rep the wardrobe when we do a podcast. Rookie. But he's got his blue light glasses on, so I guess that's okay.
Yeah, that'll suffice, right?
That'll do.
We're gonna get Natty News.
Yeah, that's what we should do.
Like put America's top.
Yeah, I like it. Anyways, we're gonna talk about training tonight. So we've got Josh on. Josh and I have gone back and forth on social media. And before people get freaked out, like not back and forth, like badgering each other, but we kind of agree on a few specific topics around training. One of the big ones that I think we can all agree on that we've seen recently is people being almost over analytical with their training and getting caught up in the minutia, whether that be reps in reserve, RPE, SFR, all these little things that, half of the slogans, I don't even really know what they're called. And, I think a lot of people
using them really know either.
Yeah. And I think people are getting lost in the shuffle, especially like younger athletes, in their late teens that are worried about if they're going to be too fatigued to do something the next day, or, I've mentioned this before, but I still remember I got a message from a guy. He was 18 and he was upset because all his school gym had was dumbbells to 100, a barbell squat rack, and then 2 or 3 other pieces, lat pull down, leg extension. And he was worried he wasn't going to be able to make progress. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, you have everything you need for the next, you could use that stuff for your entire training career and make progress. And it's just, something like that, really kind of pains me a little bit, because it's stuff that discourages people from, jumping into the whole lifting game, because they feel like, if I don't have all the prime fitness handles, how am I going to possibly grow back?
They want to have everything perfected from day one too. And it's like,
yeah, I mean, I'm 10 years in and I don't have everything perfected, but I stick with, again, probably something we can get into is sticking with the basics and, branching out when it's applicable, but not maybe losing sight of the grassroots stuff. But anyways, let's start with intro, man. For those that don't know who you are, Josh, give a brief rundown of what you're all about.
All right. So thanks again for having me on, guys. It means a lot. So for those of you who don't know, I compete in the INBF, hope to be WNBF one day. I currently coach with Chris Barakat at Competitive Breed. We're coach strength and physique athletes. Chris and I also work together in the Human Performance Lab at the University of Tampa. We have several projects going on every single semester. We're currently working on a few publications that will be out later on this year that we're super, super excited for. So yeah, that's a real brief. I've been training for strictly bodybuilding purposes since 2015. I kind of got into the weight room to be a better baseball player. Had the opportunity to play in college, didn't take it. Probably was the best decision I've ever made. Decided to just focus on my schoolwork, my degree, and then that led to Chris and I connecting, and yeah, the rest is history.
Yep.
But yeah, I totally agree with that, man. Social media is definitely, it has its positives. It also has a lot of drawbacks. People see the flashy gym pieces like Ultra Flex or what have you, all those fancy prime equipment machines, and they're thinking, oh, like I just have this standard pre-core setup, like I'm not going to be able to make it nearly as much gains, or I don't have the optimal setup, or yeah, just beginners are like focused on that unnecessary 1% that unless they're accounting for everything else, that 1% is going to be canceled out by their lack of sleep or their inability to train hard or just poor technique in general. So
that whole before we go on, that whole 1% shtick is kind of driving me nuts right now, because people are like, oh, well, every little 1%, like it's going to make a difference. And, those 1% all add up. And for sure, that's true. And, that's math, right? Like 1%, if you get all these little 1%, but at the end of the day, if you're not mastering the big 90%, then being so focused on the little things, like it's not worth it, right? Like you're putting all your eggs in the wrong basket, where you're focused on these little 1% and weighing everything to the gram. And even us wearing these blue light blockers, like, are they going to help us maybe sleep tonight? Maybe. But if we go out and crank the TV up and sit on our phones for the next 2 hours, like, we've nullified these glasses pretty quickly, right? So it's just and that applies to nutrition, that applies to training. But anyways, okay, I'll let you continue.
Yeah, like I've had clients come and ask about, like, I know this is a hot topic, unfortunately, whether or not they should be like reverse banding or just banding certain lifts, or like prioritizing longer muscle lengths or shorter muscle lengths.
Yeah.
And more often than not, the people asking can't even squat 315 for one. So it's like, and I'm not like flexing on anybody here. It's just like,
no, but it's true though, right?
If you haven't developed that baseline level of strength, if you really haven't mastered the basics, it's like you don't even have a foundation to work off of. So it's like, when you're concerned about minutia like that, it's like the odds of it impacting you at a beginner level, it's so low, just because you haven't optimized, you haven't met the prerequisites to be able to be concerned with something like that.
Trying to build a pyramid upside down.
Exactly. I mean, you look at even the guys who are enhanced, the guys at the top, they're like Kai Green, incline pressing 5 plates. Like, the documentaries about him saying like, oh, like I'll never be a power lifter, I don't really care about strength. But it's like, man, you got pretty strong. Like, Ronnie Coleman, obviously squatting 800 pounds. It's like they all have that foundation. They might not, all of them are going to do the big 3 like for their entire career. Most of them end up getting away from it just because of injuries or nagging joints. But it's like
the timeline is relative to that too, right? Whether you see them doing it now, I bet you from 16 to 30, they were doing a lot of that basic shit. And you're right, whether it's injury or whether, they don't have to train like that anymore because the foundation is there and they can, avoid it in a sense. But, I and this applies to natural athletes too, right? Like I've been really going through archives of like, older athletes from like WNBF Worlds, like 2009, and posting more older content and really finding these incredible athletes that I didn't know about. This was before my time, and observing the A, physiques they have, and B, what got them there. And they built these physiques long before all this fancy equipment was even a thing. Right? Like, trust me, they did pull downs with that V bar that you can't use anymore. God forbid you use this fixed V bar. And man, saw some pretty good backs, not gonna lie.
And I love the term you use, Josh. You said prerequisites, right? In every other aspect of life, whether it's education at any level, whether it's like athletic endeavors and things like that, there are absolutely prerequisites and barriers, right? Like you can't pass to this next level until you do XYZ, or you pass XYZ. Because of the sport of natural bodybuilding doesn't have any of that, people think, all right, because I can, I'm going to skip ahead. I'm going to do all these advanced things, whether it's the programming, their exercise selection, all these different intensity techniques. But there's no need, right? Like just because you can doesn't mean you should. and it can actually, I think, be detrimental, right? If you're trying all these crazy things, it's throwing off. Like, talk about reverse banding, right? Like, you're gonna get to a point where you're able to add extra load because of the bands or because of whatever setup you're using and modifying, but your body's not equipped to handle it yet, right? Like, you can't control that load, and you're using all these extra things to kind of like cheat through it. To me, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, 100%. It's like, don't get me wrong, these things do have a place in training, especially for the advanced individuals, like optimizing your pull downs and like targeting specific regions. Yeah, that's going to take you from your 99% to your 100%.
Like,
But
Josh, you and I went
yeah,
through my lat training and structured it similarly.
yeah. So like, obviously, like, you have a strong foundation of like weighted pull-ups, pull downs, bent rows, like those heavy compound movements, like you've already developed a solid base. And so from there, we can kind of use that to focus in on, now that we have the 90% mastered, we can kind of tune it in and focus on the small, like 10% to bring up your weak points per se. So yeah, I do think, like I said, there is a place in it, like becoming more efficient with your training, your exercise selection. It will translate to greater recovery over the course of weeks and months. But at the same time, it's like, it's not going to make or break somebody who's new to the gym.
And a lot of it's just refinement of the basics anyways. It's like, oh, I'm just going to execute this movement in this slightly different way, or add this little tiny little thing to it, or change this cue slightly. It's like little things a lot of times to the
right. And it's extremely specific to you specifically.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, like I said, we have this mastered. Now let's just tweak it just a little bit to target this maybe a little bit better for you specifically. I know, like, we look at these guys, especially in the evidence-based community, the guys who are, I guess, the top dogs and the people who have the greatest voice in the community. And oftentimes people see how they train currently and think that that's how they built their muscle. Like, that's how they got to where they're at now. Like, I used to log my training on an app, and you could see other people's training logs. And I would see people copying so-and-so's training session, like verbatim, like same exact machines, same exact, like everything.
Yeah.
When they built their foundation off of heavy training and training close to failure. And people are unfortunately focused on what the current trend is in the evidence-based community, like stay away from failure, failure's bad, black or white trend. And yeah, it's ultimately, if people knew how the top dogs got there, they wouldn't be training like they're currently training. They're training because they have to, like Dan, like, we tweak things just a little bit to make things more efficient for you, or we're training around an injury, or we're trying to stay in it, or maybe we're at the tail end of a contest prep. Like, most of these YouTube videos are being filmed like at the tail end of a contest prep, and it's like they're training that way, and they're training with those specific exercises because they're not going to fatigue you as much. And it's very phase dependent, right? So
literally today, actually, I filmed a Q&A video, and it was intermingled with today's leg session. And I spoke to that very point, because today, normally I would deadlift, right? And me and you have commented on my deadlift videos. We've gone back and forth about me, pulling 500 pounds at 4 weeks out and all that stuff. And I literally spoke about today, at 10 days out, I'm not going to deadlift because A, B, and C, risk to reward, injury, fatigue, all that kind of stuff. And that is very applicable to the time frame that I have from the show, the condition I'm in right now, and all that kind of stuff. But people like ignore all that, and they're like, oh, Leroy didn't do deadlifts today, so deadlifts are bad.
They don't take any context
That's
into,
right.
It's like
they
think it's something is a hard and fast rule, and it's like, does it apply to your context. Maybe it
Right.
does, maybe it doesn't, it's like,
Yeah. So like, think about this. Like if you filmed a training session, you're 10 days out. That's going to get a lot of views, right?
Yeah.
Probably going to get a lot more views than training in the off season, especially if you have your shirt off. So,
Facts.
so what, if you think about it, like what are people going to copy if they had to choose?
Yeah.
They're going
want
to
to see that shredded workout.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not concerned about the context. It's like they see a post like that. I'm not deadlifting because we're 10 days out. And yeah, it just makes sense, right?
Deadlifts are bad. That's
People,
what they read.
right. Yeah. So that means just I shouldn't deadlift.
You're like, bro,
Yeah.
that's not what I said.
Right. And it's like, no, that's how I built my posterior chain. Don't say that.
Oh yeah. I get right up because, anytime, especially recently with, some of the photos I've put up, it's like, how'd you do it? I'm like, scroll back on my Instagram for the last 2 years. You're going to see a lot of squatting and a lot of deadlifting. So there you
Yep.
go. Literally
Yep.
that's all. Food, squats, and deadlifts. That's enough. Go
Yep.
ahead. Now go young one.
Yeah. So Josh, you hinted quickly at like training to failure and intensity and everything like that. We're kind of being like general right now. Let's talk specifically about that, right? So, and that's something, if anyone follows like Brett or like some of our clients, like that's something that we're as a team kind of working through right now too, because we were finding, like I think we kind of all discussed briefly before, that you're almost like holding yourself back to a degree, and then inexperienced lifter specifically if you're being overly restrictive with like RIR or RPE, just because it's so hard to truly gauge that. Like the experienced lifter probably has a better idea on it, but especially for like isolations and accessories, we're as a team moving away from that and more just giving a general range of like 0 to 2, right? Like if you don't have it in you, don't go for it. If you have it in you, like empty the tank, right? Because you're going
If
to
it's there,
recover
take
from
it. If it's not,
yeah, like maybe be a little more specific with your big compound movements, because that may have like a strength progression that you're working. But like a cable curl, like I'm going to be able to recover from those. I'm going to be okay if I go to failure on 2 of my 3 sets of cable curls. Like we're okay there. But yeah, so run with that a bit.
Yeah. So I'll give some scientific feedback first. So there's quite a bit of data that shows that less advanced trainees just simply aren't nearly as good at rating reps in reserve compared to somebody who's a lot more advanced. And that's been studied multiple times, and we see the same thing every single time. The more experience you have, the better you are at just gauging how close you are to failure. And I really think that that just comes down to at least occasionally taking it there on a frequent basis, I'd say. So you get guys caught up in rating their RPE or reps in reserve, especially like novice trainees, when they actually haven't developed that skill of going to failure. How can you actually know? Like you have nothing to anchor what 4 reps in reserve looks like if you actually haven't been to failure on a frequent basis,
Well, even
So,
as I don't want to cut you off completely, but even as an advanced lifter, when any of us introduces like some sort of new movement or variation, a lot of times I find that it's like a little tough to gauge. Like I have a general sense because I've done movements that are definitely similar, but it's like it's still it's still not quite refined. Like having been under a barbell for like, if I'm doing a high bar squat, it's like I've been under more high bar squats. Like I know like how close I am, like when I'm about to snap my shit up. Like,
yeah, and think about how long you've been training, and just even introducing a new movement makes it just a little bit harder at gauging reps in reserve. Now, put somebody under the squat rack who has only trained for a year, like, and tell them to only go to 3 reps in reserve. It's like,
where are they going to cap that?
Right.
When it hurts.
Yeah.
Which is
exactly.
like at like 6 RIR.
Yeah, exactly. So like The idea of training to failure gets a really bad rap in the evidence-based community, simply because people are unfortunately just echo chambers of whoever their favorite Instagram influencer is at the time. When you really dive into the literature on volume, intensity, and frequency, you can kind of look at the study. Dan's heard me say this 1,000 times. You can look at the study and almost predict what the outcome is going to be just by how they designed it. So nearly all the studies we have on training to failure has equated training volume between groups. So the way training studies are done, they follow the scientific process in that we need to isolate as many variables as possible to kind of create as best we can a vacuum, and so that we can manipulate one variable and see if that manipulation produced the change that we're observing. So that being said, the researchers hold volume constant. So one group is training with a higher intensity or proximity to failure. One group is training with a lower intensity or proximity to failure. But we know that volume and intensity share an inverse relationship. If you take more sets to failure, you can't recover from it. You have to scale back sets. If you leave reps in reserve, you have to do more sets to make up for it. So these studies aren't necessarily accounting for it. In fact, the majority of the studies that have equated training volume have found either no difference or training to failure being inferior to leaving reps in reserve. And it's like, well, if you look at the design, you can kind of see why. You look at the studies that have found that training to failure was actually superior or outperformed the other group, you can again see why, because they were training, they actually, they didn't equate training volume. There was actually a meta-analysis that came out in, I think it was 2021, that kind of looked at this, and they ran like a subgroup analysis, mainly on, so they basically, what they did for the listeners, a meta-analysis is like a study of studies. So essentially they pick a topic and run the data on the topic compiled of all the studies that have been done in the past. So what they found was majority of these studies were done on beginners or novice trainees, and only a couple of them were done on advanced trainees, which we know the implications there. So when they ran the subgroup analysis, meaning that they just picked out the ones where they were more trained or considered resistance trained in the literature. And they found that the couple studies that didn't equate training volume, the group training with a lower volume, higher intensity actually outperformed the group that was training with a higher volume, lower intensity. But there's only so much we can take from that because it's only one or two studies. But it's something we need to consider, because it's unfortunately, it's the findings, people are just reading the abstracts or the titles or just listening to a podcast and thinking that, okay, he said that failure is bad, so I got to stay away from it at all costs. And that's really not the case, right? So the same thing goes with volume and frequency, right? The only reason why we're showing like no differences in training frequency is because they equated volume, right? So one group, and a lot of these studies are doing 3, 4, 5 times the amount of work as another group, and they're just not able to recover, right? So if researchers actually like accounted for that relationship between those 3 training variables, I think we'd see a lot more different findings. So yeah, it's just my spiel on that.
Can't even trust the research these days.
Well, I mean, it's all in the details, you know, like, unfortunately, a lot of research is done by people and supervised by people who don't train hard. I'm not going to mention any names, but it's true. Like,
it is.
So it's like, you know, a lot of these papers, especially the ones on training volume, when they're controlling for intensity, again, we have to control for all variables. If we're manipulating training volume, we have to control for intensity and frequency. So everybody trains at the same frequency, everybody trains at the same intensity. And more often than not, they say or they advise all the subjects to take every single set to failure, just because it's objective and that variable is standardized. However, you look even further into the details, you can see that some papers actually make them go down and do another rep until they actually hit concentric failure. Other studies kind of let the subjects determine where failure is, or they don't make them go down for that extra rep. And we know that beginners often quit when it just gets hard or when it starts hurting. So it's kind of like, even at these failure studies might be like RPE 7 to 9 versus RPE 5 to 6 studies. And in beginners, it's like, are we really going to see a difference? But they're not mentioning that in the data. So I think we can do better.
Yeah.
And then there's like the whole debate really too of like the theoretical versus the practical, right? So even regardless of what the literature says of like, should you train to failure, should you not train to failure, there's a whole subcategory of people that, you know, even if they were trying to go to failure, probably still aren't going to be able to, right? Because they're, you know, psychologically not going to be able to, their form's going to break down, you know, versus like the actual muscle tissue not being able to handle the load. So at the very least, like I would say, be a little bit more aggressive and assertive than you think you should be, because at least you're moving towards that instead of leaving more in the tank. But
yeah,
you would know that more than me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I tend to take that approach when I use RAR, and I've found myself failing reps when it's like, oh, that was supposed to be 2 RAR. Whoops.
Yeah, and worst comes to worst, you just drop a set, you know.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
If I'm like
That would be much better than you undershooting it, you know.
Yeah. If I'm on the fence, I'm like, am I like 3 or 2? I'm like, usually I'm like, go for it. But sometimes I'm like, okay, Danny, your ego. This is ego now.
Yeah.
Like, don't be stupid. But yeah, most of the time, I try to err on. Yeah, I'd rather be a little more aggressive than. Yeah. Then look back at the set and be like, nah, damn, I should have taken that extra rep. You know.
100%, 100%. I think that training to failure is absolutely a skill, or at the very least, training with a close proximity to failure is a skill. And I would say that would fall under the category of like a neurological adaptation. Like, you know, those like grinder reps at the very end of a set that last like way, way, way longer. Like, that's a skill in and of itself, being able to push it 100% maximum effort for a longer duration of time. Like, you never see a novice lifter do that. It's always an advanced guy. Yep. It's like usually under a lot of load, and it's usually under somebody who's done this several times. So
and it's without like the sense of panic or the squirm, like excessive squirming or tweaking out. You know, like I see Jeff Alberts has that mastered. Like,
yep. So like it's like his last rep looks the same as his first rep, but the only difference is the bar speed. It's like that's how you know that somebody's put in the time.
Yeah.
No, for sure. So before we close this out, man, give us maybe, like, for those listening, 1 or 2, I guess, take-home points, practical takeaways. You know, let's address the newer lifter that's listening to this, because, you know, we can maybe say that the more advanced guys are kind of listening just as a tune-up, but the newer guys listening to this, what can they take home? What can they take into tomorrow's session and maybe reevaluate things a little bit in a positive manner?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I would say master the movement pattern, because just there's no point in loading an improper movement pattern. I'm sure James agrees with me on that. Second, it would just be, now that you've mastered that, look to double and triple your strength on all of your lifts. Like, there's videos that I've posted in the past. There's this chest supported setup at our gym. It's like the most simple thing, with like no other gym has it. So it's been in my rotation for 3 years now, going on 4. And I look back at the first video I ever took doing that exercise was using 45-pound dumbbells. And the last time I used 130s and like matched the reps. And like I posted a side by side on my stories and it was like, this is why my back is bigger. Like you do shit like this, you will see growth. Like don't worry about like trying to optimize the angle and like getting a goniometer out to try and optimize the angle of pull. Like it has its place, but you need to be getting stronger. And like don't use that, or don't like waste time with that if you're at the beginner level.
And I think it's an important, I'm going to build on that. You made an important point about how the movements basically look the same, the 45s and the 130s, you said, which is just ridiculous, by the way, but awesome. They look the same. It's not like, you're just aggressively adding load and then all of a sudden form is deteriorating. Like you hold your execution constant, good, and progress load and just get strong as shit, like that goes a long way. If you can, squat 400 pounds with a good eccentric and to depth for reps, your legs are probably going to look pretty good.
I'd say so.
Yep. 100%.
Perfect. All right, man. Well, we appreciate you coming on. I think this is a very insightful episode, a good learning experience, not only for new lifters, but maybe advanced lifters as well, just to kind of get a bit more insight as to how they can improve things and maybe, shake some of the mental stress and fatigue. I know, I've said to the guys before that, some of the stuff I see online, it just stresses me out, drives me nuts. Like what happened to the good old days is like sometimes what I feel. And unfortunately it continues to get worse. Just from what I see, as more and more and more of it comes out, more people jump on bandwagons or turn their volume up on social media when maybe they shouldn't.
So much noise.
Noise. And I've found myself really cleaning up my following, if that's the polite way to put it. So I appreciate you again coming on. If people want to reach out to you or learn more from you and your coaching and stuff, where can they find you?
So first, I would say schoolofgains.com. That's gains with a Z. And then obviously I coach with Competitive Breed, and my Instagram handle, it's just my name clipped. So Josh, the letter T, and then the first 4 letters of my last name, BRAD. Shoot me a message, email, whatever works.
Awesome. All right, people.
And
well, if you want to learn,
plug for Josh from me too. He's the mastermind behind what I do. So cool. I do recommend Josh. Mastermind behind get me shredded glutes and upcoming a bigger back. So
perfect. All right, people. Well, if you enjoyed this episode, obviously give it a like, subscribe, and don't forget to hit us up on both Instagram, Natty_News @_daily, and the member site. If you guys want to grab some merch, if you want to stay up to date with all things natural bodybuilding, we've got exclusive content coming. And, we're just going to continue growing the Natty scene more and more and more. And we appreciate all your support as always, because without you guys, it would not be possible. So thanks again, and we'll see you guys in the next one.